I always thought that if Gearbox made one of their Pro paddles with a 16mm thickness that it could be really good. Well, they just made a 16mm Pro model called the Pro Ultimate, but is it really good?
Really?
Really?
Hey, this is Braden with Pickleball Effect. Today we're going to do a review of the Gearbox Pro Ultimate. This is the latest addition in their Pro series, which includes the Pro Power and the Pro Control. Gearbox made a lot of noise towards the end of 2023 with the release of their Pro Power model, which opened up a new level of power Pickleball hadn't seen before. The Ultimate Pro was designed to sit in between the Pro Power and the Pro Control models, and I think they did a pretty good job doing that, though there is some nuance to it that I'll get into during the playtest section of this review. The first question I know everyone is going to ask is, how is this paddle built differently from the Pro Power model? Obviously, the thickness is a big difference. The Ultimate is 16mm thick, while the Pro Power is 14mm thick. Thicker paddles are known for being more forgiving and better at absorbing pace than 14mm paddles, which are both things the Ultimate is better at doing compared to the Power. I'll speak more to that in the playtest, but that wasn't the only change. Gearbox also made some alterations to their Power Matrix core for this paddle. The core Gearbox developed is very unique and tricky to explain. In short, the Power Matrix core incorporates carbon fiber tubes and foam rather than the typical polymer honeycomb core design that you see in pretty much every other paddle out there. All the paddles in the Gearbox Pro series use their Power Matrix core, but each one has a little bit different configuration that produces different levels of power and pop. This is to say, I don't know exactly what they changed to the core, I just know that they did something a little bit different, though it's still similar than their other Pro models. The paddle is being launched with only one shape. It's elongated, has a 5.5-inch handle, and they are staying with the thinner 4-inch grip size that they have on their other paddles. The numbers of this paddle are quite different though, so let's take a look at those. The swing weights of the Power and Control were both higher at about 122, and the Ultimate had an even higher swing weight of 124. 124 is high in general, but is very high considering that this paddle only weighs 8 ounces. Its weight distribution is concentrated heavily in the head of the paddle. An interesting stat for this paddle that I don't talk about much is the balance point. The balance point shows where the center of gravity is with the measurement starting from the butt of the paddle. The balance point of the Ultimate is 256mm, which is 20 points above the average and is tied for the highest balance point measurement that I've ever done. This just shows that the weight is located much higher up on the head compared to the other paddles out there. The paddle feels very heavy when holding it, but I made some alterations to that to counteract the high balance point, and it helped it swing easier, and I'll speak to that later. Then the twist weight came in at 5.38, which is higher than the 5 I got on the other Gearbox Pro models, but this is still very low. The twist weight here doesn't quite represent the size of the sweet spot well. The sweet spot is definitely improved with the Ultimate over the Power and Control models. Price-wise, these retail for $274.99 just like the other models, and Gearbox doesn't do the discount code thing, so if you find my review helpful and you decide to pick one up, then please use the links in my description of my video to buy the paddle and support my channel. Alright, so let's go put this on the court and see how it plays. After drilling and playing with the paddle for over 2 weeks, here's my thoughts on its performance. Gearbox is advertising this as a middle ground paddle between their Pro Power and Pro Control models. I agree that it sits in between them, but it plays more similar to the Pro Power than the Pro Control model, and I'd categorize it as a power paddle and still one of the juicier power paddles you'll find. The short and sweet of this paddle is that it's more forgiving than the Pro Power paddle, and it isn't far behind on the power and pop scale, which is awesome and makes the power more accessible, with the one drawback being its heavier weight, which is a point I'll speak to specifically later. To get the maximum power out of the Ultimate model, I found that I needed to generate more swing speed and put in more effort compared to the Pro Power model, which does more of the work for you. In other words, if you're a skilled player who can generate a lot of power on your own, you'll get more power out of the Ultimate model than someone who lacks that natural power. So if you're already a big hitter, you'll get similar levels of power from both the Ultimate and Power models, but those who have less natural power will get more power out of the Pro Power model. Power is defined as how much ball speed you can generate on full swings like drives, serves, and overheads, but when we talk about pop, which is how much ball speed you can generate from compact swings, the Pro Power model is poppier than the Pro Ultimate, though the Ultimate isn't weak in this area and gives you more than most paddles. And the more I played with the Ultimate, it seemed to open up a little and give me more pop, though it still wasn't the level of the Pro Power. Though the Ultimate isn't as poppy as the Pro Power, it still has a lively feel to it and the ball jumps off it a bit. Forgiveness, or the size of the sweet spot, is noticeably better on the Ultimate than the other two Pro models. It doesn't twist as easy in your hands and you can feel less vibrations. The size of the sweet spot is better than what the small twist weight suggested. If I had to assign a twist weight that matched how forgiving it was, I'd say 6.1, which is similar to the Carbon 1X 16mm or the Rhombus R3. That is to say, it's manageable, and I never felt like it caused many issues, though it's not oversized for an elongated paddle, and there are a few shots per game where the ball may have stayed in play had it been more forgiving. The better stability of the Ultimate made it so much easier to play with over the Pro Power model for a couple of reasons. One, the paddle has a much more even response across the face, which makes the bounce more predictable and easier to control compared to the Pro Power, where it would fly off the center and then wouldn't give you as much as you expected on off-center hits, which resulted in many errors and some frustration. And two, I got a lot more balls back with the Ultimate when I was stretched out or scrambling, which are scenarios where you often miss the center of the paddle. Feel-wise, it's very similar to the other Pro models, where it has a dense, softer feel that's similar to what a control type paddle feels like at impact, though it's not quite the same. It's a unique feel. Plus, it sounds different and is a bit quieter than your regular paddle. Other big power paddles like the Paddletech Bantams or the Yolamod TA paddles are both harsher feeling and louder. The only other bigger power type paddle that I can think of that doesn't have a harsher or stiffer feel to it are the Engage Pursuit paddles, though I still prefer the feel of the Gearbox over the Pursuits. Here's an example of how the Gearbox sounds compared to a regular paddle. Control-wise, I was much more comfortable controlling the ball with the Ultimate than the Pro Power. The Ultimate isn't quite as bouncy off the face, and it's more forgiving, which both contributed to the better control. I was dinking and dropping the ball well with it and was able to keep the ball down when I was stretched out or when I was playing defense, better than I could with the Pro Power. But because it's a more lively paddle, you still have to keep your strokes compact on dinks and resets, and it's easier to pop the ball up if you have the wrong angle on your paddle. I found myself hitting a lot of drops and blocks high the first couple of sessions I played with it, but was able to dial it in and was actually controlling the ball well, and was surprised how consistent I was hitting my drops, resets, and dinks, even when I was receiving a lot of pressure from advanced players. I was able to connect and get a good feel for it quicker and better than I did with other bigger power paddles I reviewed. At the end of the day though, this is still a power type paddle with good pop, so if you don't have a developed soft game, then it'll be harder to keep the ball down. But if you do have a good soft game, then I think this paddle is easier to control compared to other big power paddles. For spin, my test came in at an average of 1987 RPMs, which is a great result. While playing, I felt like I was seeing that spin on serves and drives, though it didn't seem like it was grabbing the ball quite as well on rolls and flicks, particularly from below the net, so you had to manage pace well there, but otherwise felt like the spin was available. I think the spin behaved this way in part because it's a head-heavy paddle, so it was harder to accelerate through the ball as well versus lighter paddles on those type of shots. Speaking of weight, let's talk about that for a second. The paddle is heavier with a 124 swing weight out of the box, but it felt even heavier because the weight is so heavily concentrated towards the tip of the paddle. When I played at stock, the balance felt somewhat off and you could feel a reduction in hand speed at the net. If you're used to paddles with higher swing weights like a bread and butter Shogun, Carbon 1X 16mm, or Franklin FS Tour Dynasty, then I imagine you'd be able to adjust well. However, if you're not adjusted to those paddles, then it's going to take more time to get used to the heavier weight if you decide to go this route. Normally, higher swing weight paddles like this have high power and lower pop profiles, but the Ultimate had high power and above average pop, so you didn't have to swing big on counters to get pace, which helped it feel a bit more maneuverable than it was. Still, I personally like paddles that move a bit easier, but I liked how the paddle played, so I made some alterations to it and preferred how it felt and moved after that. It's a more complicated set of alterations than normal, so I'll explain what I did. I took the grip off and wrapped 3 strips of my 1 gram per inch tungsten tape around the end of the handle like this. The goal was to bring the balance point down so it was easier to maneuver. After that, I put the grip back on and added one of my PE UltraTac over grips. Then I put 4 inches of my lighter 1/2 gram per inch tungsten tape on the sides to improve the stability and twist weight of the paddle. I also added a strip of my standard 20mm edge guard tape on the top to protect it from scratches since it's edgeless. With this setup, the static weight went up to 8.9 ounces, the swing weight increased to 130, and the twist weight moved to 6.25. And then the balance point came down to 242. While these numbers don't look that attractive, it moved easier to me than it did out of the box, and I was able to accelerate through my one-handed backhand shots better. and the paddle just felt more stable. Adding all the weight to the butt cap is what made this paddle feel more balanced and easier to move. While I found it easier to manage and move with this setup, it's still a heavier paddle and slower in general, so if you're averse to heavier paddles, then this paddle isn't for you, but at least the paddle gives you good pop on compact strokes, which makes up for its lower maneuverability rating some. I'll finish here with my recommendation. When I measured the stats after I got it, I wasn't too excited about the paddle, even though I always liked the idea of Gearbox doing a 16mm paddle like this. And when I first played with it, it took a bit to get used to the higher launch angle, lively nature, and extra weight of the paddle, and I just wasn't in love with it yet. Then I made the alterations to it, and I was surprised at how well I played with it afterwards, particularly how well I was controlling it and still benefiting from the extra pop I had to finish points and put pressure on my opponents. I think this paddle is good and has unique qualities, but is best for only a specific set of players and not for everyone. If you're a big hitter or can generate some of your own power already, then this paddle plays into your strengths well and will give you the big power to put pressure on your opponents and win points with power. But what sticks out is that the paddle lends itself to being controlled better than other bigger power paddles and has a more comfortable feel, which is what made it unique to me. This comes with the caveat that you don't mind heavier paddles and can manage that well, but if you're looking to add more power to your game and are not a big hitter naturally, then I'd go to either the PaddleTech Bantams or the Gearbox Power Pros, as those will help you generate more power without being able to do it yourself. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and I hope it helped.
Pickleball effect going down.